How are you guys? Welcome back to this channel. This is a storyline, not a real movie. Here I will discuss the summary of the story, The Christmas Switch. Before continuing to the storyline, make sure you click subscribe. Okay, now we start the story. This story is a family drama full of intrigue and dark secrets about babies who were switched at birth.
On a freezing, snowy Christmas Eve, the fates of two newborn girls were tragically intertwined by jealousy and revenge. Rachel Grant, the heiress to a billionaire empire, gave birth to a healthy baby girl in a luxury hospital suite. Simultaneously, in the charity ward, a woman named Molly gave birth to a daughter fathered by Rachel's husband during an illicit affair. When the husband rejected Molly and her child, calling them gutter trash and refusing to acknowledge them, Molly's heart turned to ice. Consumed by a desire for vengeance, she sneaked into the nursery while the nurses were distracted. She swapped the infants, taking Rachel's biological daughter to raise in poverty and leaving her own child, Sarah, to be raised as the billionaire heiress. Years passed, and Molly's cruel plan came to fruition. Rachel's biological daughter, named Dolores, grew up in a squalid home, subjected to Molly's relentless physical and emotional abuse. Molly treated Dolores as a slave, punishing her for the sins of her biological parents. Despite the cruelty, Dolores grew into a kind, artistic, and resilient girl. Meanwhile, Sarah, Molly's biological daughter, was raised in the lap of luxury by Rachel Grant. Spoiled beyond measure, Sarah became arrogant, entitled, and cruel, believing the world revolved around her. The two girls lived in parallel worlds, unaware of the secret that bound them. Destiny brought them together at St. Peter's Arts Academy, the country's most elite school. Dolores was admitted on a full scholarship due to her extraordinary artistic talent, a feat that enraged Molly but thrilled her support of Montrose. Sarah attended solely because of her family's donation. On the first day, Sarah immediately targeted Dolores for her shabby clothes and quiet demeanor. Sarah bullied her relentlessly, calling her a roach and destroying her supplies. When Ryan King, the most popular boy in school, stepped in to defend Dolores, Sarah's jealousy exploded, and she vowed to destroy the scholarship girl. Sarah orchestrated a humiliating prank by inviting Dolores to the Elite Arts Group Society, a club founded by Rachel Grant. Dolores, who idolized Rachel, attended with hope, only to be ambushed. Sarah and her friends dumped a bucket of sewage water onto Dolores, filming the humiliation and warning her to stay away from Ryan. Just as the bullying escalated, Grandfather Grantritol's father appeared. He stopped the abuse and felt an inexplicable connection to Dolores. Her tearful smile reminded him painfully of his daughter Rachel in her youth. He apologized to Dolores, further infuriating Sarah. Suspicion began to gnaw at Grandfather Grant. He recalled a medical report where Sarah's blood type didn't align with her parents', which had been dismissed as a lab error. Seeing Dolores's physical resemblance to the Grant family, he secretly ordered his assistant to run a DNA test comparing Sarah and Rachel, and to investigate Dolores. Meanwhile, Sarah, threatened by her grandfather's softness toward Dolores, decided to frame her. She planted a valuable family heirloom diamond ring into Dolores' bag and accused her of theft in front of the entire school. The situation reached a boiling point when Rachel Grant arrived at the school to defend her daughter. Blinded by maternal instinct, Rachel viciously attacked Dolores, shaking her and calling her a thief and a lowlife. It was a heartbreaking scene. A mother unknowingly tormenting her own biological child to protect the imposter who took her place. Dolores wept, begging for mercy from the woman she admired. Just as Rachel prepared to have Dolores arrested, Grandfather Grant's assistant burst in with the DNA results, holding the paper that would shatter their reality and reveal the true identities of the two girls. The wind howled through the cracks in the window frame of the tiny, damp room that Dolores called home. It was a sound she had known all her life, a lullaby of neglect that accompanied the shivering cold of the winter months. Dolores sat on the edge of her thin, lumpy mattress, wrapping her arms around herself to preserve whatever body heat she could. Her room was more of a closet than a living space, cluttered with the few possessions she had managed to scavenge or save over the years. The walls were peeling, revealing layers of old yellowed wallpaper that smelled of mold and stale cigarette smoke. Down the hall she could hear the heavy, uneven footsteps of her mother, Molly. The sound triggered an automatic physiological response in Dolores. Her heart rate spiked, her muscles tensed, and she made herself as small as possible. In this house, silence was survival. If she was quiet enough, invisible enough, maybe today would be one of the rare days where she didn't end up with a bruise to match the grayness of the walls. She looked at her hands rough, calloused from scrubbing floors and washing dishes in freezing water, and wondered for the 1000th time why her mother looked at her not with love, but with a hatred so pure. It felt like a physical blow. Miles away, in a zip code that felt like a different planet, sunlight streamed through high-arched windows draped in heavy velvet curtains. Sarah Grant stretched in her king-sized bed, surrounded by sheets made of Egyptian cotton, with a thread count higher than most people as monthly rent. Her room was a sanctuary of excess, filled with towering displays of designer shoes, untouched art supplies, and gadgets she had grown bored with after a single use. A maid knocked softly on the door, entering with a silver tray bearing freshly squeezed juice and a warm croissant. Sarah didn't even look up from her phone. She waved the maid away with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Annoyed by the intrusion, she walked to her massive vanity mirror, examining her reflection with a critical, haughty eye. She was beautiful. She knew that, but there was a hardness in her eyes that makeup couldn't soften. She had been raised to believe she was the center of the universe, a Grant royalty in a democratic world. The concept of no was alien to her, a word that applied to other people, never to her. Molly sat at her chipped kitchen table, nursing a cup of cheap, bitter coffee. Her hands shook slightly, a tremor born of years of rage and poor choices. On the table lay a crumpled, decades-old newspaper clipping. The headline announced the birth of the Grant heiress, accompanied by a picture of a radiant Rachel Grant leaving the hospital. Molly stared at the photo, her face twisting into a sneer. She remembered that night vividly, the pain, the rejection, the way Rachel's husband had looked at her as if she were dirt on his shoe. Swapping the babies had been an act of impulse, a desperate clawing for justice in a world that had denied her everything. Every time she beat Dolores, she felt a sick sense of satisfaction, as if she were striking Rachel herself. And every time she imagined Sarah living in that mansion, she felt a vicarious triumph. She had stolen their blood and polluted their lineage. It was the perfect crime, or so she told herself, trying to drown out the quiet voice of guilt that sometimes whispered in the dead of night. Aunt Rose was the only splash of color in Dolores's grayscale life. Unlike her sister Molly, Rose possessed a heart that was too big for her chest. She worked double shifts at a diner just to sneak Dolores extra food or art supplies. Rose had seen the drawings Dolores hid under her mattress, sketches of charcoal and pencil that captured the raw emotion of the human experience. Rose knew that Dolores was special, that she didn't belong in this world of squalor and violence. "You have a gift," dully, Rose would whisper, pressing a new sketchbook into Dolores's hands, while Molly was passed out on the sofa. "This is your way out. You draw your wings, and you fly away from here." Rose didn't know the truth about the baby swap, but she knew that the universe had made a mistake placing such a gentle soul in Molly Esker. She became Dolores's shield, her advocate, and the only person who ever told her she was worthy of love. The acceptance letter from St. Peter's Arts Academy arrived on a Tuesday, buried between overdue bill notices and junk mail. When Dolores opened it, her hands trembled so violently she nearly ripped the expensive paper, full scholarship. The words seemed to glow on the page. For a moment, the damp walls of her room melted away, replaced by visions of grand studios, the smell of turpentine, and the freedom to create. But the joy was quickly suffocated by fear. How would she tell Molly? When the confrontation finally happened, it was as explosive as she feared. Molly screamed through dishes and called Dolores ungrateful for wanting to leave the family that fed her. It was only Aunt Rose's intervention, threatening to call child services and expose Molly's neglect, that forced Molly to back down. Fine, Molly had spat, her eyes cold. Go. But don't expect a penny from me. You're on your own. The night before the first day of school, Dolores sat on the floor, surrounded by a sewing kit she had borrowed from Rose. Her uniform was second-hand, bought from a charity shop, and it was 2 sizes too big. With meticulous care, she took in the seams, her fingers moving deftly with the needle. She polished her worn-out shoes with a black marker to hide the She packed her backpack of faded things she had used for 3 years with her precious art supplies. Despite the anxiety gnawing at her stomach, a small flame of hope burned in her chest. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be Molly's punching bag. Tomorrow, she would be an artist. She would be a student at St. Peter's. She allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, that she could belong there. In the Grant mansion, the mood was drastically different. Sarah was in the midst of a full-blown tantrum. Her custom-tailored uniform had arrived, but she decided the shade of blue was tacky and didn't match her eyes. "I can't wear this," she shrieked, throwing the blazer across the room. Rachel Grant sighed, picking up the jacket. "It's the school color, Sarah. Everyone has to wear it." Rachel looked at her daughter with a mixture of love and exhaustion. She tried so hard to make Sarah happy, buying her everything, shielding her from every consequence. But nothing was ever enough. Sarah's cruelty and entitlement baffled Rachel, who, despite her wealth, valued kindness and grace. "Maybe I'm just a bad mother," Rachel often thought, internalizing Sarah's behavior as her own failure, never suspecting that the disconnect was biological. The morning of the first day was crisp and bright. Dolores had woken up at 5 a.m. to take 2 buses to get to the affluent district where St. Peter's was located. As she walked toward the imposing iron gates of the academy, she felt the weight of the social divide pressing down on her. The air even smelled different here, kleiner, expensive. She watched as luxury sedans and limousines pulled up to the curb, depositing students who looked like they had stepped out of fashion magazines. They laughed with an ease that came from never having to worry about the next meal. Dolores gripped the straps of her backpack until her knuckles turned white, keeping her head down, praying she could slip into the art studio unnoticed. She felt like an imposter, a gray moth trying to hide in a swarm of butterflies. Her prayer for invisibility was unanswered. As she navigated the crowded hallway, trying to find her locker, she crossed paths with Sarah Grant. Sarah was holding court with her group of sycophants, looking every bit the queen bee. Her eyes, sharp and predatory, landed on Dolores immediately. It was as if Sarah could smell the poverty on her. "Ooh," Sarah said loudly, the chatter in the hallway dying down instantly. "What is that smell? Did the janitor leave the trash out?" Sarah walked up to Dolores, invading her personal space. She looked Dolores up and down with a sneer of pure disgust. "Oh, wait. It's just the new charity case. Did you get that uniform from a dumpster?" The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, cutting through Dolores's fragile confidence like a knife. I'm Dolores," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She tried to step around Sarah, but Sarah blocked her path. "I didn't say you could speak," Sarah snapped, with a casual, almost bored motion. Sarah swiped her hand out and knocked Dolores's sketchbook from her arms. It hit the floor, spilling loose charcoal drawings across the pristine tiles. "Oops," Sarah said, smiling without warmth. "Clumsy me." She then deliberately stepped on the drawing on top a delicate portrait of a street cat, leaving a dark, muddy footprint right across the center. Dolores dropped to her knees, frantically trying to gather her work, her face burning with humiliation. The students around them pulled out their phones, recording the scene, eager to feed the social media beast with someone else's misery. Just as Dolores felt she might dissolve into the floor, a shadow fell over her. "That's enough, Sarah." The voice was calm but commanded attention. Ryan King, the captain of the debate team and the school's golden boy, stepped through the circle of onlookers. He crouched down, ignoring the mud and the stairs, and began helping Dolores pick up her papers. Sarah's jaw dropped. "Ryan," she sputtered, her face turning a shade of red that matched her anger. "Don't touch those. They're filthy. She's filthy." Ryan stood up, handing the stack of drawings back to Dolores with a gentle smile. "Ignore her," he said to Dolores, turning his back on Sarah. "These are amazing. You have serious talent." For Sarah, this was an act of war. Seeing Ryan, the boy she had claimed as hers, defending the gutter rat was a humiliation she could not abide. Jealousy, hot and venomous, coiled in her stomach. She watched them walk away, her fingernails digging into her palms. "She thinks she can come here, looking like that, and steal my spotlight. Steal my Ryan," Sarah thought, her mind racing with vindictive possibilities. She wouldn't just bully Dolores, she would make an example of her. She would make sure that by the end of the week, Dolores Cooper would be begging to go back to whatever slum she crawled out of. Sarah turned to her friends, her eyes gleaming with malice. "We need to welcome the new girl," she whispered, "properly." Dolores fled to the nearest bathroom, locking herself in a stall. She slid down the door until she hit the floor, burying her face in her knees. Her body shook with silent sobs. She looked at the boot print on her drawing, the symbol of her ruined dignity. She wanted to go home. She wanted to run back to Aunt Rose. But then she thought of Molly's triumphant face if she quit. She thought of the life that awaited her if she failed. The endless cleaning, the poverty, the hopelessness. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "No," she told herself. "I am here to paint. I am here for my future." She stood up, wiped her face with a rough paper towel, and looked in the mirror. Her eyes were red, but her chin was set. She would not let them win. Her first class was advanced painting. The studio was magnificent, with floor-to-ceiling windows and the smell of linseed oil filling the air. Mr. Thompson, the eccentric art teacher, gave them a prompt. Paint your greatest fear. While other students painted monsters or storms, Dolores painted a pair of eyes. They were cold, empty, and judgmental. Her mother, Molly's eyes. When she finished, the canvas radiated a haunting, visceral terror. Mr. Thompson stopped at her easel, silenced by the raw power of the image. This, ... double quotes. He murmured, "This is honest. It's painful to look at, but beautiful." From the front row, Sarah watched the teacher praise Dolores. Sarah looked at her own canvasa. Technically perfect, but soulless painting of a clown in, felt a surge of inadequacy. That inadequacy quickly turned into rage. At lunch, Sarah launched phase 1 of her plan. She approached Dolores's lonely table in the cafeteria, her face arranged into a mask of contrition. "Hey," Sarah said softly. "Look, I wanted to apologize for this morning. I was stressed. It was wrong of me." Dolores looked up, wary, clutching her sandwich. "I want to make it up to you," Sarah continued, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. "My mom, Rachel Grant, started the Elite Arts Group Society. We're having a meeting after school. I want you to come. My mom loves discovering new talent. And after seeing your work in class, I think you'd be a perfect fit." The mention of Rachel Grant was the bait. Sarah knew Dolores idolized her mother. Dolores hesitated, desperate for acceptance and a chance to meet her hero. "Okay," Dolores whispered. "I'll come." The location Sarah gave was an old storage annex behind the gymnasium, a place students rarely went. Dolores arrived precisely at 4 p.m., clutching her portfolio. The room was dim, smelling of dust and old gym mats. "Hello?" Dolores called out, her voice echoing in the emptiness. "Is anyone here?" Suddenly, blinding floodlights snapped on, illuminating a single spot in the center of the room. Sarah stood on a catwalk above, surrounded by her clique. They were giggling, holding their phones out. "Welcome to the initiation, trash," Sarah yelled down. Before Dolores could move, Sarah kicked a lever. A massive bucket suspended from the rafters tipped over. It wasn't water. It was a vile concoction of cafeteria slop, muddy water from the janitor's bucket, and expired milk. The sludge hit Dolores with heavy, wet force, drenching her from head to toe. The smell was instant and nauseating, sour, rotting, and foul. Dolores gasped, choking as the liquid ran down her face and ruined her clothes. Above her, the laughter was deafening. "Look at her!" Sarah shrieked with delight. "Now on the outside, you match what you are on the inside. Garbage." Dolores stood there, shivering, slime dripping from her hair, realizing with a crushing finality that there was no club, no acceptance, only cruelty. But the laughter died abruptly as the double doors of the annex slammed open. "What is the meaning of this?" The voice boomed like thunder. Grandfather Grant stood there, flanked by the principal. He had come to the school for a surprise board meeting and had heard the commotion. He took in the scene instantly. The group of privileged bullies on the balcony and the lone, shivering girl covered in filth below. His face turned purple with rage. He looked up at his granddaughter, Sarah Grant. He roared, "Is this how you behave? Is this how a Grant acts?" Sarah froze, the phone slipping from her hand. She had never seen her grandfather look at her with such disappointment. Grandfather Grant didn't wait for an explanation. He marched over to Dolores, ignoring the stench, and stripped off his cashmere overcoat worth more than Dolores's entire house and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. "I am so sorry, my child," he said, his voice trembling with suppressed fury at the injustice. Dolores looked up, her eyes wide and swimming with tears, the sludge streaking her face. As their eyes met, Grandfather Grant felt a physical jolt in his chest. Those eyes, the shape of her face, the way she held her chin, even when she was terrified. It was like looking into a time machine. She looked exactly like his daughter Rachel did at that age. It was uncanny. It was impossible. But his heart knew it was true. I'm sorry about your coat, sir," Dolores stammered, trying to pull away so she wouldn't ruin the fabric. "It smells." Grandfather Grant held the coat firm. "Dignity is worth more than cashmere," he sighed gently. He turned his gaze back to Sarah, who had descended the stairs, looking petulant rather than sorry. "She started it, Grandpa," Sarah whined. "She was rude to me." Grandfather Grant looked at Sarah, her features that looked nothing like his family's, at her cruelty that mirrored nothing of his upbringing. Felt a chill. "Silence," he commanded. "You have disgraced this family today. Go to the car now." While Sarah was ushered away, Grandfather Grant insisted on walking Dolores to the nurse's office. He waited outside while she showered and changed into spare clothes the nurse provided. He pulled out his phone and dialed his head of security, Mr. Henderson. "Henderson," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Do you remember the discrepancy in Sarah's medical file last year? The blood type issue we thought was a clerical error. I want you to reopen that file. And I want you to find a way to get a DNA sample from a student named Dolores Cooper. Compare it to Rachel's. Do it today. Do it now." He hung up, his hands shaking. He wasn't a man given 2 flights of fancy, but he knew what he saw. He had looked into the eyes of a stranger and seen his own blood. Waiting in the hallway, Grandfather Grant's mind raced. He thought back to the day the girls were born. The hospital had been chaotic. Rachel had been exhausted. He remembered a woman in the hallway, screaming about injustice, about the Grants ruining her life. Could it be? Was it possible that for 16 years they had been raising a stranger while his true granddaughter lived in poverty? The thought made him sick. He thought of Sarah's endless demands, her lack of empathy, her complete disconnect from the family's values. He had always blamed it on spoiling her. But maybe it was nature, not nurture. And Dolores, so talented, so humble, so resilient. She felt like family. The next day, Sarah returned to school, but her privileges had been stripped. No driver, no credit cards. She was furious. She blamed Dolores for everything. If Dolores didn't exist, her grandfather wouldn't be mad at her. She needed to get rid of her permanently. She needed a crime that was unforgivable. During her lunch break, Sarah fingered the vintage diamond ring on her hand. A family heirloom Rachel had given her. A plan formed. A theft. If Dolores was branded a thief, she would be expelled. The scholarship would be revoked. She would disappear. It was simple. It was evil. And Sarah didn't hesitate. The hallway was crowded between classes. Sarah spotted Dolores at her locker, organizing her books. Sarah took a deep breath, summoned her fake tears, and lunged. She collided with Dolores hard, sending books flying. "Watch where you're going," Sarah shouted, creating a scene. In the confusion of the collision, with practiced sleight of hand, Sarah slipped the heavy diamond ring into the unzipped side pocket of Dolores's backpack. She then stumbled back, clutching her hand, and let out a blood-curdling scream. "My ring! My grandmother's ring! It's gone." At lunch, Sarah launched phase 1 of her plan. She approached Dolores's lonely table in the cafeteria, her face arranged into a mask of contrition. "Hey," Sarah said softly. "Look, I wanted to apologize for this morning. I was ... stressed. It was wrong of me." Dolores looked up, wary, clutching her sandwich. "I want to make it up to you," Sarah continued, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. "My mom, Rachel Grant, started the Elite Arts Group Society. We're having a meeting after school. I want you to come. My mom loves discovering new talent. And after seeing your work in class, I think you'd be a perfect fit." The mention of Rachel Grant was the bait. Sarah knew Dolores idolized her mother. Dolores hesitated, desperate for acceptance and a chance to meet her hero. "Okay," Dolores whispered. "I'll come." The location Sarah gave was an old storage annex behind the gymnasium, a place students rarely went. Dolores arrived precisely at 4 p.m., clutching her portfolio. The room was dim, smelling of dust and old gym mats. "Hello?" Dolores called out, her voice echoing in the emptiness. "Is anyone here?" Suddenly, blinding floodlights snapped on, illuminating a single spot in the center of the room. Sarah stood on a catwalk above, surrounded by her clique. They were giggling, holding their phones out. "Welcome to the initiation, trash," Sarah yelled down. Before Dolores could move, Sarah kicked a lever. A massive bucket suspended from the rafters tipped over. It wasn't water. It was a vile concoction of cafeteria slop, muddy water from the janitor's bucket, and expired milk. The sludge hit Dolores with heavy, wet force, drenching her from head to toe. The smell was instant and nauseating, sour, rotting, and foul. Dolores gasped, choking as the liquid ran down her face and ruined her clothes. Above her, the laughter was deafening. "Look at her!" Sarah shrieked with delight. "Now on the outside, you match what you are on the inside. Garbage." Dolores stood there, shivering, slime dripping from her hair, realizing with a crushing finality that there was no club, no acceptance, only cruelty. But the laughter died abruptly as the double doors of the annex slammed open. "What is the meaning of this?" The voice boomed like thunder. Grandfather Grant stood there, flanked by the principal. He had come to the school for a surprise board meeting and had heard the commotion. He took in the scene instantly. The group of privileged bullies on the balcony and the lone, shivering girl covered in filth below. His face turned purple with rage. He looked up at his granddaughter, Sarah Grant. He roared, "Is this how you behave? Is this how a Grant acts?" Sarah froze, the phone slipping from her hand. She had never seen her grandfather look at her with such disappointment. Grandfather Grant didn't wait for an explanation. He marched over to Dolores, ignoring the stench, and stripped off his cashmere overcoat worth more than Dolores's entire house and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. "I am so sorry, my child," he said, his voice trembling with suppressed fury at the injustice. Dolores looked up, her eyes wide and swimming with tears, the sludge streaking her face. As their eyes met, Grandfather Grant felt a physical jolt in his chest. Those eyes, the shape of her face, the way she held her chin even when she was terrified. It was like looking into a time machine. She looked exactly like his daughter Rachel did at that age. It was uncanny. It was impossible. But his heart knew it was true. I'm sorry about your coat, sir," Dolores stammered, trying to pull away so she wouldn't ruin the fabric. "It smells." Grandfather Grant held the coat firm. "Dignity is worth more than cashmere," he sighed gently. He turned his gaze back to Sarah, who had descended the stairs, looking petulant rather than sorry. "She started it, Grandpa." Sarah winced. "She was rude to me." Grandfather Grant looked at Sarah hot, her features that looked nothing like his family's, at her cruelty that mirrored nothing of his upbringing, and felt a chill. "Silence," he commanded. "You have disgraced this family today. Go to the car now." While Sarah was ushered away, Grandfather Grant insisted on walking Dolores to the nurse's office. He waited outside while she showered and changed into spare clothes the nurse provided. He pulled out his phone and dialed his head of security, Mr. Henderson. "Henderson," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Do you remember the discrepancy in Sarah's medical file last year? The blood type issue we thought was a clerical error. I want you to reopen that file. And I want you to find a way to get a DNA sample from a student named Dolores Cooper. Compare it to Rachel's. Do it today. Do it now. He hung up, his hands shaking. He wasn't a man given 2 flights of fancy, but he knew what he saw. He had looked into the eyes of a stranger and seen his own blood. Waiting in the hallway, Grandfather Grant's mind raced. He thought back to the day the girls were born. The hospital had been chaotic. Rachel had been exhausted. He remembered a woman in the hallway, screaming about injustice, about the Grants ruining her life. Could it be, was it possible that for 16 years they had been raising a stranger, while his true granddaughter lived in poverty? The thought made him sick. He thought of Sarah's endless demands, her lack of empathy, her complete disconnect from the family's values. He had always blamed it on spoiling her. But maybe it was nature, not nurture. And Dolores so talented, so humble, so resilient. She felt like family. The next day, Sarah returned to school, but her privileges had been stripped. No driver, no credit cards. She was furious. She blamed Dolores for everything. If Dolores didn't exist, her grandfather wouldn't be mad at her. She needed to get rid of her permanently. She needed a crime that was unforgivable. During her lunch break, Sarah fingered the vintage diamond ring on her Honda family heirloom Rachel had given her. A plan formed. A theft. If Dolores was branded a thief, she would be expelled. The scholarship would be revoked. She would disappear. It was simple. It was evil. And Sarah didn't hesitate. The hallway was crowded between classes. Sarah spotted Dolores at her locker, organizing her books. Sarah took a deep breath, summoned her fake tears, and lunged. She collided with Dolores hard, sending books flying. "Watch where you're going," Sarah shouted, creating a scene. In the confusion of the collision, with practiced sleight of hand, Sarah slipped the heavy diamond ring into the unzipped side pocket of Dolores's backpack. She then stumbled back, clutching her hand, and let out a blood-curdling scream. "My ring, my grandmother's ring, it's gone." The silence that descended upon the school corridor was heavier than lead, a suffocating blanket of shock that froze every person in place. The piece of paper in Grandfather Grant's hand trembled like a leaf in a storm. The undeniable truth printed in black ink. Rachel Grant stared at the paper, her mind refusing to process the information. The words, "probability of maternity," 99.99%, swam before her eyes, rearranging her entire reality. She looked at Dolores Thagara she had just shaken, the girl she had called a thief, and a gutter rat. She saw the bruise forming on Dolores's arm where she had grabbed her. A wave of nausea hit Rachel so hard, she had to grip the lockers for support. The realization was a physical blow. She had attacked her own flesh and blood. She had been the monster in her own daughter's nightmare. The maternal instinct she prided herself on had been completely broken, twisted by a lie she had lived for 16 years. Sarah was the first to break the silence, her voice shrill and desperate, shattering the quiet. "What are you talking about, Grandpa?" she screamed, stomping her foot in a childish display that suddenly looked pathetic rather than commanding. "That paper is fake. You're making it up because you feel sorry for her." Sarah looked around for support, but her friends were backing away, sensing the seismic shift in power. "Mom, tell him he's crazy," Sarah pleaded, grabbing Rachel's arm. But Rachel recoiled from Sarah's touch, as if burned. For the first time, Rachel looked at Sarah and saw a stranger. She saw the lack of resemblance, the cruelty that Rachel had never understood, the entitlement that had always felt foreign. The veil had been lifted, and the love Rachel had poured into Sarah, suddenly felt like water poured into a cracked vessel, wasted and lost. Molly stood at the edge of the circle, watching the empire crumble. Instead of fear, a twisted smile curled on her lips. The game was up, but the damage was done. She laughed, a dry, rasping sound that drew everyone's attention. "Took you long enough," Molly rasped, stepping forward with a limp. 16 years of luxury for my kid. 16 years of hell for yours. She looked at Rachel with pure venom. "You think you're better than me? Look at you. You just beat your own kid. You treated her like trash just because she didn't wear designer clothes. You're no better than me, Rachel. In fact, you're worse. At least I knew who I was hurting." Molly's confession was the final nail in the coffin. She admitted it freely, reveling in the pain she had caused, proud of the chaos she had orchestrated. Grandfather Grant signaled to the security guards. "Get the police," he ordered, his voice cold as ice. "Arrest this woman for kidnapping and fraud." As the guards moved toward Molly, she didn't fight. She looked at Sarah, her biological daughter, one last time. "I did it for you," Molly shouted at Sarah. "I gave you a life of gold. Don't you forget who made you a princess?" Sarah stared at Molly with horror. The woman she had called a filthy hag was her mother. The poverty she had mocked, the gutter she had despised, it was her true heritage. Sarah's identity disintegrated. She wasn't a Grant. She wasn't an heiress. She was exactly what she had hated most. The daughter of a criminal, a nobody. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing not for the tragedy, but for the loss of her status. Rachel moved then, moving like a sleepwalker waking from a nightmare. She stepped over Sarah, ignoring the girl's wailing, and knelt in front of Dolores. Dolores flinched, raising her hands to protect her face, expecting another blow. That simple, instinctive defensive movement broke Rachel's heart into a million pieces. "No, no, I'm not going to hurt you," Rachel wept, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Oh, God, I am so sorry. I am so sorry." Rachel reached out, her hands hovering, afraid to touch the girl she had abused just moments ago. "Dolores Isabella, I don't even know your name," Rachel choked out. "But I know you're mine. I feel it now. I should have felt it before. Please, forgive me." Dolores looked at the woman kneeling before her. This was her idol. This was the woman whose art she studied, whose elegance she admired. And this was the woman who had just called her a thief. Dolores didn't know how to process the conflicting emotions. She looked at Grandfather Grant, the only person who had shown her kindness without an agenda. He nodded gently, a silent encouragement. Dolores slowly lowered her hands. You're my mother," she whispered. The word felt foreign, heavy. Rachel nodded frantically. "Yes, I am. And I promise, I swear on my life, no one will ever hurt you again. Not Molly. Not Sarah. Not even me." Rachel finally closed the gap and pulled Dolores into a hug. It was awkward, stiff, and stained with tears. But it was the first hug Dolores had ever received from a mother figure that didn't end in pain. The transition from the school to the Grant estate was a blur of logistics and law enforcement. Molly was taken away in handcuffs, screaming curses until the squad car door slammed shut. Sarah was placed in a separate car with a social worker. Until the legalities were sorted, she could not stay at the mansion, as the environment was now deemed volatile. Dolores sat in the back of the limousine between Rachel and Grandfather Grant. She sat on the edge of the leather seat, afraid to lean back, clutching her backpack which still contained the planted ring. The silence in the car was thick with unspoken words. Rachel kept looking at Dolores, drinking in her features the curve of her nose, the shape of her eyes, trying to memorize the 16 years she had missed. Every glance was a mixture of wonder and agonizing guilt. When the limousine pulled up the long, winding driveway of the Grant estate, Dolores gasped. She had seen pictures of it in magazines, but the reality was overwhelming. It was a castle. Stone turrets, manicured gardens that stretched for acres, fountains that danced in the sunlight. It was beautiful, but to Dolores, it looked like a fortress she didn't belong in. "This is your home," Grandfather Grant said softly. "It always has been." Dolores looked down at her scuffed shoes. "I don't fit here," she murmured. Rachel heard her. "We will make it fit you," Rachel promised fiercely. "We will change everything if we have to." Entering the mansion was a sensory overload. The ceilings were higher than her entire old house. The floors were marble. Servants stood in a line to greet them, looking confused, because they had expected Sarah, but instead saw a disheveled girl in a dirty uniform. "Prepare the guest suite," Rachel ordered, then corrected herself. "No. Prepare the east wing, the master suite." The staff's eyes went wide. That was the best room in the house, usually reserved for visiting royalty. "And get the chef to prepare. What do you like to eat?" Rachel asked Dolores, realizing she didn't even know her daughter's favorite food. "Soup," Dolores whispered. "Tomato soup." Rachel nodded, tears threatening to spill again. "Tomato soup, the best we have." Immediately, the snow fell in thick, silent sheets over the city on that fateful Christmas Eve 18 years ago, blanketing the world in a deceptive peace. Inside the city's most prestigious hospital, the air was sterile and cold, vibrating with the cries of new life. In the VIP suite, surrounded by bouquets of imported lilies and a team of private nurses, Rachel Grant, the heiress to a billionaire empire, lay exhausted but triumphant. She had just given birth to a baby girl, a child destined for a life of golden spoons and velvet cushions. Meanwhile, in the charity ward 2 floors down, amidst peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights, another woman named Molly lay shivering. She, too, had brought a daughter into the world, but there were no flowers for her. There was only the gnawing emptiness of a future she couldn't afford, and the bitter memory of the man who had put her there. The man was Colton Grant, Rachel's husband. He appeared in the charity ward not to hold his illegitimate child, but to sever the tie. Dressed in a tuxedo that cost more than Molly would earn in a lifetime, he looked at the shivering woman and the newborn in the plastic bassinet with a sneer of absolute disgust. "You are a rat from the slums," he hissed, his voice low so as not to alert the nurses. "And this thing," he gestured to the baby, "is a mistake. If you ever breathe a word of this to Rachel, if you ever try to claim a cent of my fortune, I will bury you both." He left as quickly as he came, leaving Molly with a check for a paltry sum and a heart turned to stone. The rejection wasn't just painful, it was a declaration of war. Fueled by a rage that burned hotter than the fever of childbirth, Molly made a decision that would shatter the timelines of 2 families. Under the cover of the midnight shift change, when the nurses were distracted by holiday festivities, she crept out of her room. She moved like a phantom through the corridors, driven by a twisted sense of justice. She found the nursery where the VIP babies were kept. It was unguarded for just a moment. With trembling hands, she swapped the bracelets. She picked up the Grant Erisa baby, smelling of expensive lotion, and placed her own daughter, the child Colton had called a rat, into the silk-lined bassinet. "You took my life," she whispered to the sleeping innocent she was stealing. "Now, Your daughter will live in the hell you built for me, and my daughter will rule your kingdom. 18 years dissolved into history. The baby girl Molly left behind grew up as Sarah Grant. Raised in the lap of luxury, Sarah became the princess her mother intended her to be. But the poison of her origin, or perhaps the spoiling of her upbringing, turned her into something sharp and cruel. She walked the halls of the Grant mansion like a tyrant, adorned in diamonds, treating the staff like furniture. Conversely, the baby Molly stole was named Dolores Cooper. Dolores grew up in a cramped, drafty apartment where the heating rarely worked. She knew hunger intimately. She knew the back of Molly's hand even better. Molly, unable to separate the child from the family she hated, poured 18 years of resentment onto Dolores. Yet, despite the abuse, Dolores possessed a light that could not be extinguished. She was an artist, a genius with a sketchbook, and against all odds, she had just secured a full scholarship to the most elite school in the country. St. Peter's Academy. The morning of the first day of school was a study in contrasts. In the Grant mansion, Sarah threw a tantrum because her customized uniform had a microscopic wrinkle, screaming at the maids until they wept. In the Cooper apartment, Dolores woke up before dawn to hand-wash her second-hand uniform in the sink because they couldn't afford the laundromat. She smoothed the fabric with reverence. St. Peter's was her escape ticket. It was the place where Rachel Grant, the famous artist and philanthropist she idolized, never knowing it was her mother, had gone. Dolores looked in the mirror, her eyes tired but determined, unaware that she was about to walk into a lioness den where her own flesh and blood waited to devour her. The collision was inevitable. As the black limousines and sports cars deposited the children of the elite at the gates of St. Peter's, Dolores arrived on the city bus. She stepped onto the pristine pavement, clutching her portfolio tight to her chest. She stood out like a bruise on a perfect apple. Her shoes were scuffed. Her backpack was patched. Sarah Grant, holding court with her sycophantic friends on the steps, spotted her immediately. It was as if a predator sensed weakness. "Look at this," Sarah sneered, her voice carrying over the morning chatter. Since when did St. Peter's start accepting charity cases? Did the janitor bring his daughter to work? The laughter that followed was sharp and cutting, marking the beginning of Dolores's nightmare. Dolores tried to keep her head down, to remember the words of her acceptance letter, but Sarah blocked her path. "I'm speaking to you, trash," Sarah snapped, shoving Dolores's shoulder. Dolores stumbled, dropping her sketchbook. The pages spilled open, revealing charcoal drawings of breathtaking skill. For a second, Sarah looked at the art, and a flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes. Jealousy, perhaps, or a subconscious recognition of talent she didn't possess. But she stomped on the drawings, grinding her expensive heel into the paper. "Oops," Sarah smirked. "Looks like I stepped on some garbage." It was in this moment of humiliation that Ryan King, the golden boy of the academy and Sarah's childhood friend, stepped forward, his hand reaching out not to Sarah, but to help Dolores up. The war had officially begun. The silence that descended upon the school courtyard following Ryan King's intervention was heavy and suffocating, the kind of silence that precedes a thunderclap. Ryan was the uncrowned prince of St. Peter's Academy, a boy whose family wealth rivaled the Grants, but whose temperament was vastly different. He knelt on the concrete, his expensive blazer dusting the ground, and began to gather the scattered, trampled pages of Dolores's sketchbook. To Sarah, this was not merely a gesture of kindness. It was a public betrayal. She watched, her mouth slightly agape, as Ryan carefully brushed the dirt off a drawing of a cityscape. "You okay?" he asked Dolores, his voice gentle, a stark contrast to the venom Sarah had just spat. Dolores looked up, her eyes wide with shock. She wasn't used to kindness, especially not from boys who looked like they stepped out of a magazine. She nodded mutely, taking the papers from him, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent a jolt of irrational rage through Sarah Grant, a rage that was disproportionate to the situation, rooted in a deep, possessive insecurity that had festered in her soul for 18 years. Sarah marched forward, her heels clicking aggressively against the stone steps. "Ryan," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly, sweet warning. "What are you doing?" "You're getting your suit dirty, touching her stuff." She couldn't even bring herself to call it art. Ryan stood up, towering over Sarah, his expression unamused. "It's called basic decency, Sarah. You should try it sometime. You ruined her drawings on purpose." The accusation hung in the air. The crowd of students, usually terrified of Sarah, watched with bated breath. Sarah laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound. Decency. For her, Ryan. Look at her. She doesn't belong here. She's polluting our air. She turned her glare onto Dolores, who was clutching her ruined sketchbook to her chest like a shield. "You think because some boy helped you up, you're safe. This is my school, my kingdom, and you are just a peasant passing through." Dolores felt the sting of tears, but refused to let them fall. She had endured 18 years of Molly's psychological warfare. She would not break in front of a spoiled stranger on her first day. "I earned my place here," Dolores said, her voice shaking but audible. "I have a scholarship. I have just as much right to be here as you." The audacity of the peasant speaking back stunned Sarah. Her face flushed a deep crimson. "Scholarship?" She spat the word like a curse. "That just means my father pays for you to breathe. You're a leech, and I'm going to make sure you bleed." Sarah stormed off, her entourage scrambling to follow, leaving Dolores standing there with Ryan. Ryan looked at Dolores with a mixture of pity and admiration. "Don't listen to her," he said. She's been difficult lately." "I'm Ryan." "Dolores," she whispered, and in that exchange of names, a bond was forged that would threaten to unravel Sarah's entire world. The morning classes were a blur of anxiety for Dolores. Every time she entered a room, conversations stopped. Sarah's influence was toxic and pervasive. She had already spread rumors that Dolores was a thief, a liar, a carrier of diseases from the slums. Dolores sat in the back of her history class, feeling the eyes of her classmates boring into her skull. She opened her notebook, trying to focus on the lecture, but her mind kept drifting back to the encounter on the steps. Why did Sarah hate her so much? It felt personal, primal. It was as if their very souls were repelled by one another, like magnets with the same polarity. Little did she know, it was the opposite. They were two halves of a switched destiny, creating a cosmic friction every time they collided. Lunchtime arrived, and with it, the dread of the cafeteria. Dolores had brought a packed lunch amiga sandwich wrapped in wax paper, knowing she couldn't afford the gourmet meals served at the school. She found a secluded table in the corner, hoping to become invisible. But invisibility was a luxury Sarah Grant would not grant her. Sarah sat at the center table, the Queen's table, watching Dolores with the eyes of a hawk. She whispered something to one of her lackeys, a girl named Jessica, and handed her a carton of chocolate milk. The cruelty was orchestrated with military precision. Jessica walked past Dolores's table and, with a feigned trip, dumped the sticky, brown liquid all over Dolores's head and her only uniform. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. It was a sound that echoed in Dolores's nightmares. The cold milk dripped down her hair, soaking into the collar of her white blouse, ruining the fabric she had so carefully washed that morning. She sat frozen, the humiliation burning her skin. Sarah's laugh was the loudest, a triumphant cackle. "Oops," Sarah called out from across the room, mimicking her earlier apology. "Looks like the trash needed a wash." Dolores stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply gathered her things and walked out, head held high despite the liquid dripping from her nose. She walked straight to the bathroom, locking herself in a stall, and finally, silently, let the tears come. In the bathroom, Dolores scrubbed at her uniform with rough paper towels and cold water, but the stain was stubborn. It was a metaphor for her life no matter how hard she scrubbed. The stain of poverty, of not belonging, wouldn't come out. As she stood there, shivering, the door to the bathroom opened. She expected Sarah to come in for round 2, but instead, it was a janitor, an older woman with kind eyes. She saw Dolores' state and sighed. "That Grant girl again?" the woman asked, handing Dolores a clean towel from her cart. Dolores nodded, unable to speak. "She's got a heart of coal. That one," the janitor muttered. "Don't let her break you, honey. I've seen girls like her come and go. They shine bright for a while, but they burn out. You've got survival in your eyes." While Dolores was trying to salvage her dignity, Sarah was in the courtyard, fuming. The milk prank hadn't given her the satisfaction she craved. Why? Because Ryan hadn't laughed. In fact, Ryan had looked at Sarah with pure disgust and walked out after Dolores. Sarah paced back and forth, her fingernails digging into her palms. Why does he care about her? She hissed to herself. She's nothing. Sarah touched the ring on her finger as simple, somewhat tarnished gold band with a small, cheap stone. It was the only thing she possessed that wasn't designer. Her mother, Rachel, had told her it was a family heirloom from a distant relative. But in reality, it was the ring Molly had slipped into the bassinet during the switch, a guilt-ridden token left with her biological child. Sarah cherished it obsessively, feeling a strange, inexplicable connection to it. It was her anchor. Ryan found Dolores sitting on a bench outside the library, drying in the sun. He sat down next to her, offering her his blazer. "Put this on," he insisted when she tried to refuse. "You're freezing." Dolores looked at him, confused. "Why are you being so nice to me? You're one of them." Ryan shook his head. "I'm not one of them. I just happen to have money. There's a difference." He looked toward the school building, his expression darkening. "Sarah wasn't always this bad. We were kids together. But something is wrong with her. It's like she's trying to fill a bottomless pit with cruelty. But that's no excuse. I'm sorry for what she did." "It's not your fault," Dolores said softly, pulling the blazer around her shoulders. It smelled of expensive cologne and cedar. "I'm used to it. My mother, double quotes." She stopped herself. She couldn't tell this rich boy that her own mother called her worthless every day. "I'm tough," she finished. Ryan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the artist behind the poverty. "I saw your drawing before Sarah stepped on it," he said. The perspective was perfect. "You have a gift, Dolores. Don't let them take that from you. That's the one thing money can't buy. And that's why she hates you. She has everything, but she has no talent." The afternoon brought art class, the sanctuary Dolores had been waiting for. The teacher, Mr. Sterling, was a legend who had mentored Rachel Grant herself. He announced the semester's project, Identity. They were to create a piece that reflected who they truly were. Sarah, sitting at her easel, stared at the blank canvas. Identity. She was Sarah Grant. She was rich. She was powerful. But when she tried to paint, nothing came. She felt hollow. She looked over at Dolores. Dolores was already sketching, her hand moving with a fluidity and confidence that was mesmerizing. She was drawing a flower growing through a crack in the concrete. It was beautiful. It was raw. Sarah felt that familiar surge of inadequacy. She walked over, pretending to inspect the work, and accidentally knocked her jar of paint water all over Dolores's sketch. "Clumsy me," Sarah drawled, her eyes cold. But this time, Mr. Sterling saw it. "Miss Grant?" he barked. "That was deliberate," Sarah gasped, feigning shock. "It wasn't. I tripped." Mr. Sterling wasn't buying it. "Dissension, Miss Grant. And you will apologize to Miss Cooper." The room went silent. No one gave Sarah Grant dissension. Sarah's face turned purple. "Apologize to her. Do you know who my father is?" Mr. Sterling crossed his arms. "I don't care if your father is the Pope. In this room, talent is the only currency, and you are currently bankrupt. Apologize." Sarah didn't apologize. She grabbed her bag and stormed out of the class, vowing revenge. This was where Dolores Cooper had not only embarrassed her, she had turned the teachers and Ryan against her. As Sarah walked down the hallway, she pulled out her phone and called her mother, Rachel Grant. "Mommy," she wailed, tears streaming down her face, instantly transforming into the victim. "You have to come to school. I'm being bullied. There's this girl, this ghetto girl, ... She's ruining everything. She attacked me." Rachel, on the other end, listened with the fierce protectiveness of a mother lion, unaware that the ghetto girl she was being summoned to destroy was the daughter she had mourned the loss of connection with for 18 years. While Sarah plotted, Dolores stayed after class to salvage her drawing. Mr. Sterling helped her dry the paper. "You have something special, Dolores," he told her. "I haven't seen a touch like this since." "Well, since Rachel Grant." Dolores looked up, her eyes shining. "She's my idol," Dolores admitted. "I've studied all her work." Mr. Sterling smiled sadly. "It's ironic. Her daughter has none of her spark. But you have her soul." The comment hung in the air, a heavy truth that neither of them understood the literal magnitude of.